sending it out in the kitchen. And they're involved with procurement, they're involved with customer demands, they're involved with getting food out on time. I mean, all of this stuff. And a lot of times the owner's not in touch with that. So a savvy owner will say, I need those people to be feeding into the system to help me understand how to evolve this organization so it's successful. And that's another cut that's just as legitimate as that top-down one, and you want both of them running at the same time.
Yeah, I've actually used a bit of that second mentality with my clients as well, getting them involved in the feedback from the guests and saying, hey, we want to hear it. And people are often hesitant to say something because they feel like it's, may offend them. I said, well, tell us, well, whatever happened, good or bad, How do you gauge timelines of when you take a large organization and want to do these massive transformations or just allow them to happen? How do you gauge the timeline?
Well, a lot of it depends on circumstance. Like if you're trying to do a turnaround, let's say that you're running in an organization and you're in a dying industry. And newspapers and magazines come to mind, right? And you have to figure out how to take this thing and just completely shift it around. Well, now you're talking about getting the media involved, you're talking about policy, and you have to look at the environment. Are you already an acknowledged leader? If you're somewhat of an acknowledged leader and you're already connected to the media, it can happen very fast. But if you've got a long hill to climb, it's going to take longer. One of my favorite clients right now is Otterbein Retirement Community in Ohio, and they want to free elders and the people who serve them from an institutional mindset and lead the nation in that. This is a powerful initiative, but they're a 100-year-old organization, but they have already established some momentum. I think that they're going to be out on the front within a year in terms of leading it. So it can happen very fast if you really put these things into practice where you're getting everybody involved.
And what do you see, if you take a company of a certain size and go through this transformational process and maybe in, 5 or 10 years they feel like it's kind of time for another one, does that second one or multiple ones change flavor, or do you feel like the organization's kind of evolve into a new being and now it kind of continually happens?
Yeah, and I don't even know that things last 5 or 10 years. I mean, things are just in constant turnover right now. What we saw in the World Bank in those 2 years that I was involved in the mid-90s was that things were changing so rapidly. It was like driving on a racetrack while the racetrack is being reconfigured. And it was even disorienting, literally, at times, because policies that were in effect yesterday are no longer in effect today. People are doing things, and they're teaching you what you're doing instead of you teaching them. And you really have to have like some kind of a center or compass when the change really takes off. And just like you said, you're not in control of it. It's like, it's going through the system, and that's a very different experience than somebody who's kind of like, pulling the levers and, saying, well, we need more over here or less over here. It's a much more fluid environment.
What sort of local organizations or companies might you want to have people watch or gain some knowledge from watching what they're doing?
Well, one that I've got my eye on is the Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind, where Tony Cancelosi is the CEO. I've been working closely with him and Kevin Locke, the Vice President of Business Development, not as a client. In fact, I just joined their advisory board, but I've been watching them, and I wrote a Fast Company article about them because Tony is turning this organization around, and it's local here in Washington, D.C., and it has impact on the ground, serving the blind and visually impaired. This was a nonprofit that had really stalled a few years ago. And Tony has got private sector smarts, and he's dedicating them now to helping this nonprofit turn around. And we're seeing massive results, including grants from the federal government to train veterans who are returning, injured veterans who are returning who have some kind of visual impairment, and then match them with jobs. There's all kinds of exciting things happening. So I'd keep an eye on the Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind and Tony Cancelosi.
You mentioned that they stalled a few years ago. Do you know what may have caused that?
I think they had really come to the point where they were an accepted institution, and kind of writing a check to them. They were known for making light bulbs and sponges, and the blind people are making, and they've gone totally high tech now. I mean, they have just completely shifted. It's gone kind of from Leave It to Beaverland into the 21st century, and now what they can do is that they can help anyone who's visually impaired or blind get up and running in society with all kinds of technical equipment and training. It's really amazing. And they have a summer camp coming up where they send kids who are visually impaired in Washington, D.C. off to camp for a week or two that's just for them, and that's really an exceptional experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you share with us a couple of success stories on the corporate side? A few of your biggest successes?
Sure. I was very proud to work with the Peace Corps. I worked with Gaddy Vasquez while he was director of the Peace Corps. And they had two big change initiatives that they were facing. This was in the early 2000s. One was the changing demographics, more African Americans, Hispanics, and elderly people going into the Peace Corps. And the Peace Corps is traditionally set up for upper middle class white kids who have a very different set of values and needs when they go off onto their experience. And so they had to adjust the way they recruited, how they enrolled, and how they trained people. Because third world countries were no longer asking just for help in, for example, how to plant vegetables. They wanted knowledge management or business strategy. And there were people who were available to do that, retiring congressmen, people really at the apex of their game. But they had to go through this old style, kind of like, tell us who your high school principal was and who your teachers were, and they didn't have time for that. So we had to change that. The second thing was technology in the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps used to be an immersion experience. You'd go off for 2 years, and you wouldn't see anybody that you knew until you came back. And now, kids are taking their cell phones with them and calling their parents in the morning and blogging through their cell phones while they're out. So it's a very different world, and the Peace Corps decided to embrace that. So that was one big success story, working with them. Another one that I'll just mention was I did some work with the International Bridge, Tunnel, and Turnpike Association here in Washington, D.C. in the beginning of the economic downturn in 2009. They have an enlightened CEO, Pat Jones, who saw the storm coming and said, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to accelerate my organization and establish an ambitious agenda and really sail into this storm and come out the other side. And I had the chance to work with him on a strategic planning retreat for his board that was designed to shake them up, but only in a good way, so they would create an ambitious mandate for him to carry out. So there's a couple that I can think of.
You talked about him as an enlightened CEO. So how do you mean?
Pat's just got fire in his belly. He's on fire. And he wants to see his organization succeed. He's playing with stakeholders at all levels. He's very exciting to be with. And just this was a perfect example of Pat's enthusiasm. I mean, the economic downturn was happening and most people were just clamping down. Portfolios were shrinking, and Pat was like, this is an opportunity to just go to a whole new level.
The storm is a perfect analogy for that. You think diving into a storm and saying, hey, instead of turning around, let's go through it and pop out on the other side.
Yeah.
All right, Seth. Well, I consider you a thought leader. We've got about a minute left, and as a thought leader, what do you see we should be looking for over the next several years when it comes to change?
The big turnaround, the revolution for me is in people-centered activity. We have got technical stuff down to a fault. We have just tremendous amounts of expertise. What we're missing is tapping the heart. This type of engagement does that. It gets people's enthusiasm. The heavy lifting is when you can establish esprit de corps. Once you've got that, you can make miracles happen. Our organizations are falling down on it. The stuff you see, the finger pointing that's going on with BP and the Tony Hayward and all these executives from Halliburton and all these different organizations is the polar opposite of that. What you see with Wall Street when they're testifying before Congress is the polar opposite. These guys are missing the boat. The people who are really excelling are saying, look, we're all connected. We may have this entity that drills for oil, but this is about energy for the planet. This is about the ecosystem. This is about our children's future. And they step in the driver's seat. Instead of trying to push someone else and say it was his fault, they step in and say, we are going to generate the future our children will be proud of. And that comes from the heart. So to me, that's the next revolution.
I love it. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank
we
you.
Appreciate you for being here, Seth. You've been watching We Mean Business. To learn more about Seth Kahan, visionary leadership, and his new book, Getting Change Right, you can visit wemeanbiz.tv. So for Tony Marchanti and myself, Steve Dorfman, thanks for watching We Mean Business. We'll catch you next time.